Alright, hey everyone, this is Ash. Welcome back to the King's Speech. So initially I had planned to do like a full written up script for this video, kind of doing a bunch of deep dives, but in what I believe is called personal growth, I decided it's honestly not really worth my time at this point anyway to kind of rehash some of the same points over and over again and kind of speculate on things that may or may not happen. So try. I'm gonna try to touch on at least some of these things because they are important and relevant to the chapter and kind of like my ongoing criticisms of the arc as a whole. But I'm gonna try to keep this video as succinct as possible. So hopefully it won't run over the time. Hopefully I won't make this overly long. But we'll see how that all goes. I'm not going to do a huge front load of information stuff this time because I did a channel update that's uploaded right now, so that'll kind of give you a general broad overview of what to expect in the coming weeks and things like that. So without further ado, let's dive into the video proper. As always, I'll kind of just go from start to the finish through the flow of events as best I can. I'll do a few digressions here or there as need to kind of talk about stuff. But yeah, we'll just kind of go through it usual way that I do. But yeah, I apologize if anyone was kind of expecting, because I did say last week I had plans to kind of do like, a video about like all the thematic stuff that Otis touched on, hasn't delivered on, what else he has left to wrap up, things like that. But honestly, like, I don't think things have changed too much since I've done the last one of those videos, so felt like it wouldn't be a really good use of my time. So I guess starting at the beginning, looks like Oda has, subverted expectations again, because it turns out no miracle is there to save Luffy just yet. He plummets straight into the ocean, and he's apparently going to drown while someone comes to his rescue. So we'll see how that plays out. And I'll point out, like, this is something I theorized as a possibility back before chapter 1000 dropped. So, on the one hand, like, I want to be excited about the possibilities that this could bring story-wise, but I still think, like I mentioned last week's video, or the last OP reaction video I did, I think I'm just cautious about the broader implications of this, because Oda really has a track record of undercutting a lot of momentous occasions like this with fake outs, or with miracles, what have you, ex machinas, etc. So I'm gonna reserve judgment right now until we see how this plays out, how he handles it. Because right now my bet is on the Hard Pirates coming in to save him on the sub. I think that's the most realistic option. I've also seen people tossing out that, the voice that Momo might have heard might be Zunesha coming to the rescue. I've heard some people mentioning, I've completely forgot about this, but people have mentioned that the boar that we saw in Oden's flashback might finally make a reappearance. I don't know what the boar is gonna do unless it like jumps into the sea and decides to go rescue Luffy. I don't know what bringing that in would really do for it, but yeah, I guess that is another question. Like, because the boar was introduced for a reason, so I guess we should see it coming back at some point. Quickly before I forget again, I mentioned this in the other videos I did. Apologize if you hear kind of like a slight droning noise in the background. I have my fan running right now because it's like 30 plus degrees outside. I am absolutely boiling, so I need the fan on a high speed to kind of keep cool. I already tested it out. My voice comes through pretty clear. Shouldn't be, hopefully, too distracting, or shouldn't be like drowning me out or anything, but just wanted to let you know in case you're wondering what that noise was. But yeah, also I've heard people also tossing out the idea that the Sea Kings might be coming to rescue Luffy. That seems unlikely for a couple of reasons, but honestly, this is Oda. He could do whatever he wanted. I think the most ridiculous theory I've heard so far is that this is how Luffy's gonna awaken his powers, and then he's gonna somehow turn the water to like have the properties of rubber, or he's gonna like turn the seafloor to have the properties of rubber, and he's gonna use it like a giant trampoline, like Super Saiyan, like Superman fly himself out of the sea uh, back onto Onigashima. I'm really hoping that's not how it's gonna play out, because that would be terrible. But again, we'll see. My bet is on the Hard Pirates. I guess that's part one of that. And then I guess we have to talk about the rest of the moment as well. Because if I'm being honest, it felt really anticlimactic for Oda to kind of reveal that, Luffy's defeat basically came about just because he ran out of hockey, because he wasn't like pacing himself properly, and kind of smacked him off Onigashima because of that. And I'm not saying this, purely because of all the theories I've had about, kind of holding back a power up, like holding back, the ace in his sleeve, so on and so forth. But I'm not gonna say that isn't a part of the reason, like why this is kind of disappointing. But yeah, I guess we'll get back to that a little bit later, because I want to talk about some of the other stuff first. Because there's some of the other filler stuff that happens, before Bao Huang announced. Actually, no, sorry. My thoughts are kind of racing faster than I'm speaking. Yes, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit past some of the other filler stuff that happens. Because I want to talk about the Bao Huang announcing like Kaido's victory stuff, because it's kind of related to current thoughts I have about Luffy. And the problem I have, like, with the raid overall, like with Wano overall as well, is the tonal and thematic inconsistencies that have been kind of prevalent throughout this arc. And to kind of like TLDR, because I want to get like too deep and like rehashing old stuff again, there has been a lack of hopelessness prevalent in this arc, because I'm seeing a lot of fans on Twitter kind of like expressing surprise and like shock and like, oh my god, I can't believe, things are going bad. I can't believe, that Oda had Luffy knocked out. I can't believe, that Kinemon, Kanjuro, and Kokiku are potentially dead. And the reason that kind of like bugs me, apart from, stands being stands and just kind of not approaching the series kind of critically. God, what am I trying to say? Sorry, my thoughts are racing again before. Thoughts are racing before I can get them out properly. But I think the issue I have with, Luffy's, like, the sudden turnaround where Luffy is, like, boldly declaring that, I got this, don't worry, guys, I got this, and then turning around and having Kaido be, like, knocking him off into the sea, is I feel like this is a moment that should have felt inevitable. Like, I feel like there should have always been an undercurrent of dread throughout the arc building up to this moment, right, where the readers kind of knew that, this was going to end badly for Luffy, but we want to kind of like be optimistic and still imagine things would end up for the best. And I think if that had happened, I think this moment would have felt a lot more gut-wrenching than it does, because the problem has been that Oda has kept hyping up Kaido as like this insurmountable threat, like, oh, in a one-on-one fight, always bet on Kaido. It's like, oh, all these famous pirate captains and crews and everything have all submitted to Kaido's will. And it's never felt like that has actually been the case throughout this arc. Like, even from the Wano citizens themselves, there has, apart from like the questionable moments where they bounce out of their funk really quickly, like, these people have been oppressed for 20 plus years, and the one kind of like opportunity chance that they had to kind of like set things right Like Oda set up Oden to be like this charismatic, once in a lifetime kind of ruler who had, was super powerful. Everyone loved him. Blah 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 blah. After even he couldn't manage to take out Kaido, I feel like given that seeing that kind of like beacon of hope being shattered should have made the citizens of Wano much less trusting, like hopeful about like this random ass pirate coming out of nowhere that no one's ever heard of, just kind of declaring that he's gonna beat Kaido, and everyone just kind of putting all of their belief in him and like in his belief in him in achieving this victory. Like, it doesn't feel natural. Like, it feels kind of forced. And I get that this kind of ties into the larger, like, the Shonen Jump whole power of friendship theme. But I don't like the fact that, I don't like the fact that this idea of, losing faith in yourself or your friends, is being treated as something reprehensible. It's like, oh, how dare you lose faith, you're not a good friend if you do that, etc., like all that kind of junk. And I feel like, especially in an arc where the oft-reiterated theme is, the villain specializes in breaking people's spirits through dominance and submission. I feel like that's the one arc where you can give people a little bit of leeway if their faith in someone, kind of takes a little bit of a dip, or if there's just like a tiny seed of doubt that gets planted. And I'll admit that, done right, a person's stubbornness and determination and not breaking down, or giving the villain satisfaction, or seeing them give up, or seeing their spirit get broken, can be a powerful inspiration, can be a really good, like, it can inspire a lot of hope and resistance in people if it's done right. Except those kinds of moments are usually accompanied by said person being put through the absolute ringer, being debased, dehumanized, and having to make difficult kind of choices, and being given seemingly insurmountable challenges to overcome. And that's what's really been lacking in all of Wano so far. And that's part of the reason why, like, the Straw Hats, fanatical devotion to the idea, like, oh, Luffy's gonna become Pirate King, no matter what. Yeah, he's gonna be Pirate King. We'll never lose hope in him. Blah blah blah. Like, the mantra that they keep kind of repeating over and over and over again really has no weight to it anymore. But because I've mentioned this like a few times, but the Straw Hats' attitudes towards the challenges, struggles they faced in Wano, or the way they respond to the plight of the people, has been largely lackadaisical or blasé. Like, perfect example, the one I keep bringing up, is when Luffy was one-shotted by Kaido, tossed into Udon. Again, perfect example of what I've been mentioning, because tossing him into Udon was, I thought, should have been the moment where we finally see, like, all the different techniques and things they tried to do to kind of break down Luffy's spirit. And instead it just became Oda's version of the hyperbolic time chamber, where Luffy's just like, no, challenge, what's that? Like, he just went on a training regimen so he could become powerful enough, so all this hockey power-up bullshit could be believable. And the thing that bugged me about that is when we saw the Straw Hats' reaction to his imprisonment the next day, they were just smiling and laughing and eating soba and being like, oh, it's alright, Luffy's in prison, it's fine, he'll get through it. And this attitude kind of has kept persisting throughout the arc, And aside from singular moments like when Zoro got mad at Yasuo's execution, or when he found out, about what Orochi did with the smile fruits, and how he gave them to, these starving people as like a form of sick torture, there's no, like, lingering emotional connection between the Straw Hats and people, even after these kinds of moments. Because you constantly see them making these dumb jokes like Usopp being like, oh, huh, if I get captured and tortured, man, I'm just gonna spill my guts. Like, you won't be able to stop me. You won't be able to stop me because I'll spill my guts so fast. Right? And like the stuff like Shitji being like, oh, I can't be bothered to keep my identity a secret. Because food is so important to me. And then that again undercuts a lot of the themes of this arc. Undercuts a lot of the themes of this arc. So, like that's why like the sudden reversal of Luffy getting defeated by Kaido doesn't really land with the impact it should, because there's no real emotional like investment or resonance either with the characters and what they're fighting for, or for the readers, to the current conflict and everything that's kind of going on. So we'll see if Oda managed to like pick up the pieces and see what he does with it. But yeah, like I don't know, this should have been an impactful moment, but it didn't land the way I think Oda expected it to land. And I'm not. The thing is, like, I'm not the only one that's also kind of pointing this out. I think a lot of the One Piece fans have also seen like the One Piece stands I've seen reacting to on Twitter. I don't think a lot of them have also reacted to it the way I expected either. But discussion for elsewhere, so we'll get on to the other stuff. The Yamato stuff, it's just kind of getting tiring at this point. Like, I know Yamato's kind of like a beloved character now within the fandom. There's been like a whole bunch of discourse on Twitter because bigots are trying to, bigots are out there bigoting and trying to, and like basically not trying to reason away why, Yamato's preferred pronouns are not he, him. It's a whole fucking mess. I'm not even gonna get into that. I will say, like, I wish there was more nuance to this conversation, because Oda has absolutely kind of contributed to the environment where bigots feel emboldened enough to, even start discourse like this. Not that they really even ever need a reason to do bullshit like this, but Oda definitely hasn't helped with some of the ways he's handled kind of Yamato's whole identity bit. And the fact that, he's still doing this stupid mystery bullshit of like, oh, I am Oden, I am Oden, I am Oden, without really diving deeper into kind of Yamato's character development, like what his dreams are, what his goals are. Apart from that, like, I wish he would give Yamato more to do rather than just kind of running around to try to serve as a set piece for all these other characters instead. And I honestly, like, I can't discount the possibility that Oda's gonna kind of backtrack on this and have Yamato at the end of Wano, be like, oh, whatever end his character arc comes to, is gonna have him end with being like, oh, I'm no longer Oden, so I'm no longer using like he, him pronouns, which is not inherently a bad thing. Like, Yamato decided, like, these pronouns don't apply to me anymore, is not an inherently bad thing, but it will definitely give bigots ammunition to kind of justify their transphobic talking points of trying to be like, oh, see, we were right the entire time, blah, blah, blah. So I wish Oda would just kind of clear this up sooner rather than later. But again, like, we can't really do much about it. The Momonosuke stuff, like, I don't know, this could turn out to be something interesting, but this is something I posted about on Twitter. And I think the problem with how Oda's approach to storytelling has kind of changed and evolved for the worse over the time skip is he seems more determined to kind of insinuate and play up these mysteries, kind of talk up how great the answers will be, like all that stuff, rather than shift his focus towards, trying to be unpredictable, rather than just telling a good story in the present and kind of letting that be the way like reader investment gets carried forward. Because there's a lot of people trying to argue that like, oh, this is just a Shonen Jump formula, like the authors like has to have cliffhangers and this and that to kind of keep readers coming back, etc., etc. And that is not the way to tell a good story. Like, that's the most superficial aspect of what good storytelling is. Like, if the characters are compelling, if their narratives are compelling, then you don't need to rely on cheap tricks like insinuating like all these stupid mysteries like, oh, Momo says he's super important. What does that mean? Oh, Yukaido said something about Joy Boy. Like, oh, well, what does that mean? Oh, mystery. Because the problem is when Oda sets up like reader expectations for stuff like this, the longer the wait is for the payoff to the longer the wait to the payoff or we get these answers, the more reader expectations are like hyped up and built up. And if you don't deliver, I feel like it hits a lot harder than if you hadn't done something like this in the first place. And I feel like that's the other problem like Oda has. Like, he keeps like trying to insinuate, build up all these big mysteries, like cliffhangers and things, and he never really delivers on them in a satisfactory way. And like that's why a lot of this chapter just doesn't hit me, because it's like, oh, Momono's like trying to be like, oh, Utsuma truly must not die. Like, just make Momo a compelling character now, rather than trying to use him as some kind of plot device for some future promised development instead. It's like it's the same with Yamato constantly doing the Imoden. Just make Yamato a compelling character now, rather than trying to tease this mystery of why Yamato keeps going Imoden, like all that nonsense. Like, after a while, it just gets super tiring seeing this over and over and over again. But it's just my opinion on it. Like, honestly, I don't know. I just don't care enough about Momo. My emotional investment in him is so low that teasing some mystery about his future role, or him potentially being Joy Boy, or people tossing out theories that he might be the third ancient weapon Uranus, doesn't really do anything for me. Because if I don't care about him, why am I going to care about his importance to like the overall plot? Is the question I'm wondering. So again, like, Oda's gonna Oda. That's whatever. Chopper, I'll say I'm glad at least Chopper is struggling to take down Queen, even though he's in his monster, awakened Zoan form. So I'm glad he's kind of struggling with that. The Caesar flashback seems really, really forced. Like, Oda has been shoehorning in, like, the Straw Hats getting power-ups throughout this arc. First with Shitji getting the raid suit. Him just tossing all of that development out the window just so he can have, a suit power-up so he can fight what's their faces, the commanders and everyone on even ground. He's done the same with Zoro having, now a new powerful sword, that has Oden's Haki or whatever crap in it. And now he's doing this with Chopper, where it's like, oh, somehow decided to collaborate with Caesar on the Rumble Balls. Like, did everyone just forget that Caesar is a shitty-ass scientist and nothing he's ever made has actually worked? Like, do we just forget that Punk has to create this whole land of death thing, and then Oda at the end immediately undercut it by being like, oh, it doesn't actually kill people for like 24 hours, so you can go rescue them really quickly, it won't be a big deal. And he couldn't even like do the gigantification serum and stuff like that. So why would Chopper collaborate with him on being like, oh, you can make the Rumble Ball stronger? That doesn't sound suspicious at all. Sure. Like, this just seems like a shoehorned in way for Oda to kind of give Chopper a power up. And honestly, it's a little bit disappointing that in an arc with Zoan users, with Zoan users, I was gonna go a whole thing about like outcast and everything else, but Oda didn't really do anything much with that scene, so it seems kind of pointless to bring that up. But it's kind of disappointing that Chopper really hasn't gotten much focus or development apart from that. Like, even with Queen being like experiment and stuff like that. So again, it's like, yeah, it's nice to see him finally, fighting, getting his due and everything, but again, emotional investment is low. Like, this is not going to be the end of the fight. I still think it's going to be Shitji and Chopper will have to team up and do something towards it with the end. I wish there was at least a hint that there's going to be some like creativity involved in this fight, but does not look like it. I honestly don't know how Oda's going to wrap this fight up, like how he's going to have it come to a conclusion. But I guess I'll also just quickly address this. This is kind of why I think it's bullshit that the other Straw Hats don't have hockey yet. Because, again, I reiterate, it feels like having hockey feels like the bare minimum you would need to be able to survive in the new world. And the fact that half the crew did not unlock it or learn about it during their time skip training seems kind of bullshitty, especially given like how important like the importance to Luffy's kind of like growth and development has been with hockey, where he's had to like learn future sight, where he's had to learn conkers, where he's had to learn advanced armament. It seems kind of dumb for him to be like, oh well, the other Straw Hats don't need it, they'll just get along without it somehow. And Oda could have kind of somewhat circumvented that if he'd actually put more of an emphasis on creativity in fights, kind of overcoming that little handicap. But he hasn't, so he has to pull out like these bullshit power-ups and things to kind of justify how these characters are kind of like being able to go toe-to-toe with someone they really shouldn't be able to go toe-to-toe with. But yeah, that's just all I gotta say about that. I already kind of talked about the whole, the Straw Hats all hearing about Luffy being taken down and then be like, no, that's not true, screw that, we'll keep fighting. Like, I don't care, because at this point, there's been... The reason I don't really care about this moment is that it is not going to actually lead to anything. Because as I pointed out, like, the Straw Hats have been really kind of blasé and lackadaisical in their attitudes towards the fact that, that they were supposedly fighting one emperor whose forces outnumber them. But then Big Mom showed up, which kind of was supposed to amplify the danger to them. And despite the fact, they've pretended to be self-aware, and then like during Zoe, during Whole Cake Island, the fact they kept mentioning like, oh, we've been underestimating the emperors, we've been underestimating their forces, they're more powerful than we give them credit for, blah blah blah. And the fact that they turn around and then just go back to being overconfident again, go back to repeating the same mistakes over and over again. Like, that's the reason like none of this really sticks or lands with me, because they're not gonna learn any lesson from this. We're not gonna go like look back on this and think like, yeah, we were too cocky, we were too overconfident, next time we need to do this, people's lives were in danger. Like, there's no sense of any of that, because ultimately what will happen is they'll win. They'll be like, hey, at the end of the day we won, we don't really need to change or do anything because everything turned out fine. So like, it just does not incite any kind of emotion in me seeing that. Brings us to the worst part of the chapter, which is, oh my god, yes, Conjuro was an absolute dick for again trying to do the Oden ruse, because Shinobu and Momo haven't seen this, so of course they'd buy into it. Kiku's like justifiably mad about him trying the same trick again. But again, I'm like reiterate for the 100th time, the fact Oda didn't bother trying to set up a proper emotional connection between any of the Scabbards, the fact he didn't devote enough time in the flashback to showing the development of their friendship, the family bonds and everything else like that, really undercuts moments like this where we're supposed to believe that, Kiku couldn't bring herself to kind of slice him down because of, how great Oden was, and everything he did for them, like the bonds between them and Kanjuro and everything else. None of it lands with any real impact. I just don't give a shit about the Scabbards. I don't give a shit about their bonds as a family. So rather than, this feeling like a humanizing moment for Kiku, where it's just like, I can understand why she would, why she'd be hesitant to cut down a friend. It just makes her look dumb for like being fooled by this asshole who she knows is tricking her, right? And she ends up just getting cut down by him. And it's even more awkward because in a recent SBS, like, Oda's insinuating that Kiku basically has like a crush on Kinemon, and I feel like that was meant to kind of like amplify the kind of like the emotional like resonance of this scene where Kiku's just like, oh, I'm dying, blah blah blah, and Kinemon's like crying over her and everything. But I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing, but I know this line is supposed to like read poetically, but it just read like the cringiest shit I've ever seen, where it's like, oh, but if the fallen snow is melting, the dawn is near. Like, come on, Oda, you're better than that, man. Like, he's done really good poetic lines in Wano. This was not one of them. This just seemed incredibly forced. And then, like, I don't know why Oda just kept putting off Kanjuro's death until this point, because it's not really any more meaningful than any of his other two previous fake out deaths have been. Like, I don't know why Oda decided like, oh, I'm gonna save up for this, have this like I'm gonna act like this is the big emotional like resonant moment that I've been building up to. It's the same with like, because again, this is something I kind of like partially call like Conjure's gonna get like a redemption of sorts, where he's like, oh, I have regrets about having betrayed you because you were my best friend. There has not been enough narrative setup to kind of justify the emotional impact that Oda seems to think the scene is or will have. Like, apart from the fact that Kinemon and Kanjuro were, the ones that like left with Momonosuke and things, there has not been enough of a showcase of their relationship to justify this idea that somehow Kanjuro's like, oh, you were my best friend, or like, oh, this is so hard for me to cut you down. Like, it just does not work, and Oda trying to force it just makes it a lot more awkward than it should be. It brings us to Kaido coming down and bashing the shit out of him. I really wish I could take this seriously. I really wish, I could feel like, any kind of emotion at Kinemon's sacrifice. I can almost guarantee that Oda's going to undercut in the next chapter. Whether it turns out, Kanjuro is like, as a last final gesture, create a Kinemon ink clone, or, Kinemon managed to block it, because only one of his sword pieces went flying. So it's going to be like, oh, Kinemon managed to barely block it with the other sword, some crap like that. Like, Oda's done The Boy Who Cried Wolf so many times. I cannot bring myself to actually believe in any of this. I don't buy for a second that Kiku's dead. I don't buy for a second that Kanjuro's dead. I don't buy for a second that Kinemon is dead. So, again, like, compounded with the fact I feel nothing for the Scabbards, it's... I really, really wish Oda had just spent a little bit more time on the on the on the moments that mattered most, rather than with all the pointless stuff. Like I've brought this up before, but he could have easily replaced that stupid filler chapter where Frankie spent like half of it running back and forth trying to find the blueprints for Kaido's mansion, and it instead just used that, that page space to instead show more of like the bonds and the development between the Scabbards and Oden. And again, reiterate, I really wish Oda had better editors who could what's the word I'm looking for? Who could censor him better, for lack of a better word, and kind of more fine tune his focus. Because it's been apparent for like a long time now, every time Oda talks about like how many ideas he had and the fact he's unable to discard ideas because of creativity and all that, it's become more and more apparent that Oda's kind of just throwing shit at the wall, and like everything that sticks he's kind of including in the story no matter what, just because basically FOMO. He's like, oh, if I don't include it, I'll never get a chance again. And it really is hindering his story. And it's compounded by the fact he's basically become like the M. Night Shyamalan of shonen manga, where he's kind of fixated on like the trick of being like, oh, I'm always going to insinuate, mysteries and try to be unpredictable. And he becomes kind of so laser focused on doing that one singular thing, because he seems to think that that's what he's best known for, or that's what where his skills lie, whatever. And it comes to the detriment of his storytelling because he becomes so focused on that rather than telling a good story. And I think it's apparent in this because seeing even the stands kind of come out of the woodwork and be like, yeah, I don't buy the debts at the end of this chapter. I don't really feel the emotional investment, things like that. I think that is more telling than anything else for how detrimental like these elements of his storytelling have become. But this late in the game, I guess we really can't expect him to change. So I don't know. I don't know if it's worth continuing to criticize him for that. When the environment he's kind of built and surrounded himself with is not really conducive to kind of promoting growth and development, things like that. But I don't know. Wano is honestly, it's been dragging on for 3 years now, and I am just so super fatigued at this point. Like, it's just gotten so tiring, and I just really want it to end at this point. And honestly, I don't think, even if Oda 100%, like, just from here on out, just puts out his best work, I don't think this arc is salvageable. Which is a shame, because it did have so much potential, and it could have easily been one of the best arcs in the series. But Oda just continually is his own worst enemy, so it's a shame, but it is what it is. We'll see next chapter what happens. Maybe I'll be surprised. Maybe things will change for the better. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see what happens. With that said, I'll wrap this up. Went a little bit longer than I would have liked, but hopefully I got all my thoughts across and I didn't ramble and digress too much. Next week I will try, because I've been really bad about this, I'll try to do the experiment with doing, the reaction and the review as separate videos. So I'll try that as an experiment next week. So I'll try to do the reaction as soon as the chapter drops, which is around 10 a.m. MST. So look for an announcement on Twitter. So I'll try to do that and then post a separate review video. We'll see how that experiment works out. As always, thank you all for tuning in, and if you like my content, please do like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Channel update should have been uploaded by now, so hopefully it should be out on the channel. So anyone looking forward to like read through schedules and things like that, go take a gander at that. Till next time, this is Ash. I will talk to you all later.